need you more. Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Dungeons and Dragons. Satan's Game.
Hello, hello, good evening. Welcome, everyone, to this special late night schedule, unscheduled, I should say, live stream. This is going to be a weird week. For starters, we are still technically on the clock for the magnum opus that is Stonetop, and we've gotten a lot of great traction from that, and I've been really enjoying a lot of the comments that I've been seeing, and a lot of people have found their way from Stonetop to some of our other PBTA streams, which that's been really, really cool. So I appreciate that. However, this might be a weird week where I end up streaming like on Monday and Wednesday rather than Tuesday and Thursday. So we'll see. It might be a weird week. But any case, late night. But I wanted to throw a stream up there because it's I like sharing. I like sharing stuff with you all. And if it's not apparent, I love this hobby of ours. And sometimes, of course, I like to share not just information with you all, but my love as well of this hobby. And unfortunately, given it's just the nature of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, it may not be apparent. However, I love Dungeons and Dragons. I will admit, 5th edition. It's not a game that I am rootin' tootin' to play, just because it just doesn't do a lot of things that I have already seen. I've already seen those things. So, and there's just certain things about the elements of the game that just don't. There's other games that I would rather play, but D&D, is at the core of my DNA. So that is where we find ourselves tonight. So this is going to be a very strange stream. So strange in a way that you may not yet expect. So we'll get into this. Just want to say hi to everybody. By the way, so if it was not apparent, for starters, it's already telling to me potentially that no one in chat. No, we don't have a lot of people. Unannounced Monday night stream. What's unannounced late night Monday night stream with a very short run-in. So we don't have a ton of people here. But already I am delighted that no one in chat knows what I'm talking about. So that already makes me excited. Secondly, so this is the poll. So what is your experience with BX D&D? And for people who don't know what BX D&D is, this is BX and D&D. Now, B stands for basic, X stands for expert. And specifically, this is the 1981 Mold-Vey basic. Now, there's several versions of basic. We've talked about this many times over the course of the channel. But this is the edition that for a lot of people, because of the OSR particularly, this is the edition that a lot of people go back to. In some ways, this is the most the original basic, which was the 1979 blue box, which came from J.E. Eric Holmes, was really trying to recreate a lot of the elements from OD&D, right? The original D&D. Basic D&D, though, was a new thing, trying to do something where, it could sort of be an entry point for a simpler version of the game in direct comparison against advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I got a super chat, but it didn't pop up in any of my prompts. Weird. Super chat from Ben Nelson. Thank you, Ben. Said, I'm going to have to catch the VOD, but wanted to say that was a very enjoyable session 0 for Tor. Super pumped for the Tor solo mega game. Thank you, Ben Nelson. Appreciate that you enjoyed the VOD. And yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun. I'm excited to get people excited about Tolkien. And actually, there's a tie into this. This is kind of a long-winded introduction to this. So thank you, Ben. I appreciate you. It's actually doing quite well. Normally our, our actual plays only get a couple hundred views, but that one got, over 1,000 or something like that. And I just put it up this morning. So that's pretty good for us. That's actually really, really good. So we'll see. Obviously, actual plays tend to wither on the vine. But the fact is this is only going to be a 10 episode or 10 session campaign. So hopefully people maybe stick with it. Again, the beauty of it is that I would be running this game regardless. I'm not running it for an actual play. That's why we don't use the term actual play. We just call it an actual play as a joke because we're actually playing. Like, whereas most actual plays are anything but an actual play. They're very much a contrived, derivative. Let's try to be the next Critical Role. 99% of the time, honestly, they're a cringe fest, if I'm being honest. So anyways, okay, never mind. People did, it's just my ninja thing crashed. Cool. See, we thought it was Twitch. But it turns out it is not just Twitch. I got to figure out this social stream ninja thing, what's going on with it, because it does keep crashing like this. And it's very weird. It's very annoying. Anyways, welcome everybody. Sorry about that. I might have missed a couple of your chats, including Ben Nelson's VOD. That should have been my first clue that the thing was kicking off. This is the OSG of the OSG. This is the J.E. Eric. This is the J.E.H. the John Eric Holmes version of Basic. This came out in '79, I think. So this is super. This is sort of the blue box Basic. That was followed by this. This is 1981 Basic. This is the magenta box Basic, which is what this is called. And then this was followed a couple years later by the Menser Basic. I actually do not have a copy of 1983 Basic, but that's the red box with the Larry Elmore cover with the guy. I think it's been retconned to be a girl now. Anyways, it's a guy with the shield and the sword, and they're like charging for. You're kind of like point of view behind them, and you're like charging forward into a dragon. That's the 1983 Basic. That's what a lot of people. That was the one I think that has the most. I'm not sure which one sold more copies, but that Basic is typically known as BECME Basic because Basic Expert Companion Master Immortal. Whereas the original BX D&D is just Basic and Expert. Anyway, all that to be said, this is this is a really cool version of the game. It's very stripped down, but it has a lot of the DNA of what we would call D&D, and to the point where this version of the game is really what kind of drives a lot of the OSR, right? A lot of the retro clones came out of this version of D&D. Any case, so again, sorry if I missed some chats. If it wasn't if you didn't see it here on the stream, then I missed it. So I apologize for that, because again, my thing crashed. Yes, we have MERP is in the first look queue, so MERP is coming. I did find a cache of MERP PDFs, so even though I think they're technically illegal now because of copyright issues and stuff and claims, but we got them, so we're gonna be doing some MERP. Pumpkin, hey, what's up? My chat earlier that you may have missed was I tried to get my friends to play BX multiple times, but they've always turned me down because they have some bad misconceptions. And bad misconceptions, I think, are fair, because it was a very different type of game, than what we were used to. In particular, I mean, look at this introduction. Look at this book. Notice anything about it? Say it's not a role-playing game. It's a fantasy adventure game. I mean, don't get me wrong. The term role-playing game is and was used, but predominantly, it is called a fantasy adventure game. Not to say that again that it isn't a role-playing game. It is, but again, and you can also see that the entirety of the book is a whopping 63 pages, and that includes, by the way, a Dungeon Master section, a monsters section, 15 pages of monsters, by the way. Let's see, what about 8 to 10 pages of treasure. So the core example of the rules are 28 pages long. So 28 pages gets you the introduction to the game, how to make a character, what are the different classes, alignment, all the spells, how does playing an adventure work, including encumbrance, wandering monsters, experience points, how does an encounter work, including the combat rules, and that's it. And then the other remaining pages of the book are dedicated for the game master, including the monster list, the treasure list, and information for the dungeon master, which really at that point in time meant dungeon. Like making a dungeon, making a scenario, choosing a setting, it meant making a dungeon. All right. None of this is why we are here today. So the reason we're here today is because I played the One Ring on Sunday. Well, I ran session 0 for a group of patrons, and, we were discussing and talking about things, and I made this comment, and I don't exactly remember what the exact line of conversation was, but long story short, somebody mentioned, kind of like tongue of cheek, the idea of like, we were talking about getting treasure and, how the sources of shadow and how you can acquire shadow. One of the ways you can acquire shadow is through greed. And you get greed, potentially by finding, hordes of treasure or potent magical items. So literally finding magical items can tempt your character in the One Ring. And somebody said something about, blinged out or getting blinged out or something like that. And that immediately jogged something in my brain from a very long time ago. And it jogged my memory. And again, if you remember this, shout out to you as well. What it jogged in my memory was an old post, or I should say an old forum post, okay, on Dragon's Foot, okay? And Dragon's Foot is an old forum-based website dedicated to older school D&D. Now, one of the first things to note here, so as we go through this, by the way, you may occasionally see posts from me from this era, right? So circa 2013. My username is Asmodeus DM. And a lot of people, I remember growing up, that would be like my name in like StarCraft. And they were like, oh man, you must really love Dungeons and Dragons. You put DM at the end of all your usernames. And I go, no, those are my initials, man. Like my initial, Derek Melinda. My initials are DM. Anyways, this story, now keep in mind, this is 2013. So this is like before 5th edition even came out. This poster here, and I just realized I bet you my social stream crashed again, didn't it? Yep, it did. Wow, this thing sucks. I need to figure out what the hell is going on and why it keeps crashing. All right. I just think that people aren't, people just aren't talking. Let's see here. So, in any case, oh, I see what's happening. Okay. I mean, I don't see what's happening, but I'm just saying, like, I can tell what's happening. Anyways, so here we have a post from circa 2013, and what we had here was an individual who went by the name Mailer, who at this time was running a game for his crew, and his crew, these were 3rd edition players, right? So these were people who had started playing, 10 years ago during the halcyon days of 3rd edition D&D. And so Mailer here grew up playing, grew up playing BX D&D. So he decided to run old school D&D for him. Now he started a post on Dragon's Foot, and he was describing these parties, and, to no one's surprise, his group kept getting wiped out. So at this point, we're at about like page 3 or 4 of this thread. And the first couple of pages, they're fine. There's nothing that great. But they ended up eventually making a party after another complete TPK. And he, again, so this is post 73, right? He's made a bunch of posts. And he says, Mailer here, that's again the OP. And he says, something wonderful is about to happen. And what begins is a epic tale or saga of BX D&D. And yesterday, Sunday, I was suddenly reminded of this. I mean, I think I've talked about this maybe once before a long time ago, but I don't think I've ever really shown this. And I don't even know, maybe somebody else has covered this on YouTube. I don't know. But this at the time, almost 15 years ago or whatever, 13, 14 years ago, this was like a legendary post because it was just so awesome. I'm watching this thing happen. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to read this forum post to you. Now you could go and read it yourself, but I'll try to add in my own little bits of BX nomenclature for people who may have questions. And really we're just kind of hanging out, and it's kind of me doing a little bit of story time via story time. Which is to say I'm reading someone else's story. So after a complete TPK wipe, the Fellowship of the Bling is formed. Okay, so the Fellowship of the Bling is Aragorn, level 1 thief, 3 hit points. Gandalf, MU, right? MU because magic user, because wizard is not a class. Mage is not a class. It's called magic user. Gandalf is a magic user. Frodo is a halfling, 1 with 8 hit points. Sam is a halfling with 3 hit points. Pippin is a halfling with 5 hit points. Gimli is a dwarf with 4 hit points. Boromir is a fighter 1. And Legolas is an elf 1. Got to have a long BX session today. When I told some of the players that their exploits were popular on the internets, we decided to ask, what if the Lord of the Rings took place in Gary Gygax's Middle-earth? We got in several adventures, and they are good ones. So, for starters, hey, thank you, Agile Monk. Appreciate you. 16 months. Thank you for the adventure. Appreciate you as well. Couple of things for people who don't know anything about BX D&D. Number one, in BX D&D, you don't pick a race and you don't pick a class. There is just one list of race classes. So if you're a halfling, that's also your class. In fact, it's called your class. Your class is halfling. So there are no halfling fighters or halfling clerics. There is halfling, elf, dwarf, fighter, thief, magic user, and cleric. So that's it. Now, someone asked, why would Aragorn be a thief? Well, I think it's because, number one, you want a thief. So that's number one. Number two, Aragorn is supposed to be a ranger. He's supposed to be kind of sneaky and shifty. So, I think they had to, somebody had to be a thief. So I think they just made Aragorn a thief, because who else would it be? Now you might say, well, why wouldn't one of the halflings be a thief? Because again, halflings couldn't be thieves, right? If you're a halfling, your race and class is halfling. So the only people who could be thieves were humans. Anyways, so at this point, the way that he was doing this, this is old school tech here. There used to be a website, I think it's still up there, called Wizard Dawn. It's similar to Don John, where it's basically just a randomly procedurally generated dungeon. They have an 8-person party played by 7 players. So another thing that's really one thing to note is old D&D was designed to be played, like a lot of people, like we see Critical Ranger, yes, correct. There is no Ranger in BX D&D, correct. There is only elf, halfling, dwarf, fighter, magic user, cleric, thief. That's it. 7 classes. And yes, halfling is a class, elf is a class. But yeah, there's no Ranger. So, the idea back then was that you were playing with 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players. And ironically, that really went away during the 3rd edition era, right? 3rd edition, the idea was that you had a 4-person party, and that really persisted through, for a long time. And it wasn't really until the modern kind of like the 5th edition with like Critical Role particularly. I probably blame, Critical Role. But like now you see these 5th edition parties that are like 6, 7, 8 players, and it's crazy because 5th edition definitely is not designed for that kind of size of party. But not only was basic D&D, designed for it, it was kind of expected. Now, he did make a couple of tweaks. You'll see here, AD&D hit die sizes, re-roll 1 or 2. It's actually funny, as I read this, I realize now that I think I used to use this house rule for a while. Okay, well, in basic D&D, fighters rolled a d8 for their hit dice. Clerics rolled a d6. Whereas in AD&D, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, fighters rolled a d10, clerics rolled a d8. So he's just basically saying that, fighters got a little bit of a better dice roll. And to be clear, you re-roll. You just at the first level, you don't get hit. You don't get full hit points. You roll your dice. The difference here is if you roll a 1 or a 2, you get to re-roll it, which explains why the thief, and the magic user actually have reasonable hit points, because thief and magic user both roll d4 for their hit points. Now, Gandalf, these are all completely randomly rolled, must have had a really high constitution because to get a +1 bonus. So my guess is that Gandalf rolled a 4 and had a +1, so 5. Because you're re-rolling a 1 or a 2, a thief or a magic user could only have 3 or 4 hit points, right, using this rule. The stats, as always, are 3d6 roll and keep, which means you roll 3d6 down the line. And as always, a pure 100% fudge-free dice. Geez, we're falling apart tonight. I think my mouse just died. Like, everything is just going crazy here. You might hear like a doo-boo-doo. Yeah, and my mouse did die. Okay. So a couple of things here. Real Nutrimentor says, I think Dark Dungeons has additional races. Yeah. OSR, and retro clones, they added a bunch of shit. They added a bunch of stuff. Ray says, that's fair, Derek. Halflings are basically thieves anyways. Actually, in basic D&D, Zip Zap Rap is correct. Halflings were much closer to fighters. Correct. They actually got they actually got pretty good hit dice. They fought as fighters. They had the same attack bonus as fighters. They got a little bit of bonuses to hide and move quietly, but only in woodlands or forests. So yeah, they were actually more like fighters in that way. Yeah, correct. They have stealth, but they really don't have any way to. None of the disarming, none of the pickpockets or anything like that. Right, and they also had insane saving throws. You were correct. So, yeah, some people know some good stuff here. So, Vin says, this stream sounds like what you hear said about actors when they make art house films. He did this one for himself. Yes, correct. Exactly. This is just me indulging. So, the Fellowship meet at Rivendell to discuss... Sorry, here we go. The Fellowship meet at Rivendell to discuss the cursed One Ring. Elrond. It must be taken to Mount Doom and destroyed. But unfortunately, you are all first level and have no hope. You will have to first delve dungeon after dungeon, accumulating gold, because as we all know, hoarding treasure somehow makes us more powerful. Yes, said Gandalf, this is known to be true. And so the Fellowship of the Bling was formed with one goal, grab the loot. So someday, maybe they could think about making a plan to destroy the One Ring, many, many years from now. And so the Fellowship of the Bling descends the stone steps into a dark and damp corridor. Gandalf holds his lantern aloft, and they soon come upon a door and a southeasterly bend in the passage. Aragorn and Legolas listen at the door, but hear nothing. The Fellowship takes position, and Gimli opens the door. Inside is a debris-strewn chamber, swarming with giant rats. Gimli slams the door shut. I'll not risk the diseased yellow teeth of those rats so that we can pick through the rubble and debris, says Gimli. The Fellowship begins to take the bend in the passage when the starving giant rats in the closed room start pouring through a hole in the floor. Aragorn, don't let any more of them come through the hole. Gimli and Boromir charge to the hole, trying to stem the tide of rats pouring out of the hole, but several dart past their feet and are running through the ranks of the party, gnashing at ankles and shins. Gimli hacks one with his great axe, and Sam and Frodo stomp and stab at the scurrying rats running amongst their feet. Legolas speaks some words in the Elvish and casts a spell of light right on the rat hole to discourage the remaining rats from charging out. Gandalf says, "Excellent, Legolas, excellent." But though the remaining 14 giant rats turn back when confronted with the blinding light in their rat tunnel, there are still 4 rats attacking in the corridor. The rats gnash and bite. "Ah! It bit me!" Pippin cries out. Then Aragorn screams out. One of the rats has latched onto his inner thigh. Sam and Legolas rush to Aragorn's aid, slaying the gnawing rodent. Pippin slays one of the 2 rats assailing him, but the other rat bites right through Pippin's less armored calf, and the little hobbit cries out. Blood splurts across the passageway. Pippin falls back while Legolas and Gimli finish off the remaining rats. 84 XP for 14 giant rats slain or outwitted. Legolas: "That light won't hold them off for long. We should move on." But Aragorn and Pippin are both slouched against the wall, bleeding badly. "No," says Gandalf. "Pippin and Aragorn can't go on. We must return to Rivendell to rest." And so the Fellowship of the Bling flees the dungeon without further event. Each member receives 10 experience points and no treasure. But after returning to Rivendell, Pippin falls ill from the rat bites. The fever was so intense that he would be unable to adventure with them for several weeks. So the Fellowship of the Bling asks the hobbit Merry to join them in Pippin's place. So, a couple of things from this very first post. Number one, they're not rats, they're giant rats. Number one, there's 18 of these giant rats. So this idea, obviously, my guess is, it's probably like 3d6 or something, like 46 hit points, or giant rats. Obviously, 18 giant rats is nowhere near any sort of balanced encounter or whatever or anything like that. Considering, by the way, that any one of these rats could kill a party member. In fact, you could see that 2 people almost died to a single giant rat. So 18 of them. And they only fought 4 of them, which brings us to the second point, which is something that, again, the OSR loves to talk about. You'll notice that Legolas, yes, Legolas, cast a spell. Now, the reason why? Because elves were broken as shit in basic D&D. Elves were not only really good fighters, they were also, and they had a slew of enhanced stats, great saves, immunity to certain effects. They also were full spellcasters. And they were basically as good a spellcaster as a wizard is. Now, unfortunately, you randomly rolled for your spell. And in this case, Legolas's one and only spell is the spell Light. So, where we see the OSR come in here is you can see that Legolas cast the Light spell, right, which is in basic D&D can be cast upon a person. You can actually blind people with a light spell. You can cast it, of course, upon a torch or a brick or a stone, but you can also cast it upon an area. So in this case, he cast this blinding light spell into the entrance of the tunnel of the rats, so the rats didn't fully come through. So you can see that sort of combat as war element come through as well. Third thing that you'll notice, so the GM gave them full experience points for defeating or outwitting all 18 giant rats. Sure, they didn't kill 18, they killed 4, but the other 14 were essentially defeated. So they got full experience for that, 84. And that gets divided amongst every member of the party, 8. So they each get 10 XP. And they need like 2,000 or 2,500 or whatever XP to level, which would mean that if they just fought the same encounter that they just fought, they would have to fight that encounter like 200 times in order to get enough experience points to level. And keep in mind that that one fight almost took out 2 people in the party. In fact, one person, Pippin, became so ill from the rat bites, became diseased, and since it takes weeks, potentially months to recover from a disease like that, they basically retired the character and brought in Merry instead. All right. Now, one other thing. In BX, the term adventure means going from your town or your safe place out to the dungeon, doing a bunch of dungeoning. Maybe you do end up camping or whatever, staying out overnight, and then returning to town. That is called an adventure. Thus, it was the case that in many situations, when you sat down, you would get, you might have several adventures in a single session, right? So each of those forays is called an adventure, right? So you go on an adventure and then you return to town, that's an adventure. You go on an adventure, you fight stuff, you go back, that's an adventure. So I think typically the way that Mailer makes his posts is he makes one adventure per post. However, these all may have happened in the same session, right? So don't think that this took 4 hours, right? This may have only taken, 30, 40 minutes. Now, what are the odds that you survive 200 encounters? Almost zero, Platinus. And this gets into a whole other issue, which is the biggest mistake that people made. I know I made it as a kid. I thought treasure for experience points were stupid. Now, granted, getting experience points for killing things, really, if you think about it, is just as stupid. But I grew up playing like Final Fantasy and video games, and that made more sense to me. And so I didn't award experience points for treasure, which you were very much supposed to do in D&D. And a lot of people did that, especially in AD&D and in AD&D 2nd edition. And as a result, it was almost impossible to level up. But in these games, you get 1 experience points for every gold piece value of treasure that you loot. And that's where you're supposed to get most of your experience from. So the value is in finding treasure and returning safely with it, not in fighting creatures. All right. The Fellowship of the Bling is Aragorn, Thief 1, 3 hit points. Gandalf, Magic User 1, 5 hit points. Frodo, Halfling, 8 hit points. Sam, Halfling, 3 hit points. Merry, newly rolled, Halfling, 8 hit points. All right. Gimli, Dwarf, 4 hit points. Boromir, Fighter, 6 hit points. And Legolas, Elf, 6 hit points. And so it was that the Fellowship returned to the dank dungeons where they first encountered the rats. With new member in tow, the team once again descends the stone stairs. They quietly slip past the rat room and take the southeast bend in the passage. Passages branch off, but the Fellowship stays the course on the angled passage. They come to a doorway, which opens on a small triangular chamber with armor and weapon racks along the walls. 8 kobolds occupy the chamber and already have their daggers drawn because they saw the approaching lantern. Gandalf steps forward and speaks with the kobolds in their native tongue. Soon, the kobolds relax and sheath their weapons, and the conversation continues for some time. Eventually, the kobolds move on, and the party searches the room, finding a pouch with 171 gold. Also, a nice set of plate mail is on one of the racks, which Legolas switches out for his chain mail, or chain armor. 40 XP gained for 8 kobolds encountered. The triangular weapons room also has a door in the northern wall. The kobolds tell me that the room is empty, but we should give it a look, just in case, says Gandalf. And indeed, the square room beyond is mostly empty, with a few bits of discarded junk laying around the floor. The Fellowship regroups back in the triangular weapons room, then backtracks along the angled corridor. 6 spitting cobras have wandered into the passage and are coiled up on the floor. They begin to writhe as Gandalf's lamplight falls on them. No, says Merry. The party falls back a few feet to what they feel is a safe distance. There is no way around the snakes. So, Legolas casts a spell of light right over the snakes. The bright light causes the cobras to scatter, and eventually, they are gone. Note from the GM, I rolled to see if any scattered the party's way, but they got lucky. Passage cleared of venomous snakes, the Fellowship continued forward. 78 experience points gained for 6 spitting cobras. So the Fellowship backtracked along the angled passage and now took the eastern branch, with Aragorn about 60 feet ahead, sword and torch in hand. They journey for a bit when the passage turns south. Aragorn continues scouting ahead. They come to a wide junction with 3 doors and 2 new passages. Aragorn falls back in to rank up with the party, and they gather in the juncture. "I've got a bad feeling about this," says Gimli. They search the juncture. They listen at doors, hearing nothing at any of them. They quietly try the northern door. It looks to have once been a kitchen of sorts. Gimli and Aragorn search, but find nothing of note. Next, they try the first of 2 southern doors. Aragorn and Gimli search the remains of a bedroom, finding a satchel with 232 gold pieces. Next, the final southern room appears to be a blacksmith chamber of sorts. An unexpected churning sound thrums in the background. A search reveals nothing. And while Gimli and Aragorn are searching the chamber, the rest are gathered back in the large juncture. "Something is coming," says Legolas. Indeed, a shadowy object is approaching from the east corridor. Maybe a wolf or dog. The Fellowship takes defensive stance and prepares for actions. A jackal enters the edge of the lantern light, and upon seeing the large party, the scrawny beast turns and runs away, back down the corridor from which it came. 5 XP gained. They discuss whether to continue or to leave now with the loot. Gandalf points out that if they return later, they will just have to brave the wandering monsters of this dastardly dungeon just to get back to the point where they are right now. "We are in good condition," says Boromir. "We should go forward." So Aragorn scouts the south passage, coming to a doorway into a square chamber. Stairs now lead down into the chamber, and a great statue stands in a recessed corner. Some bats hang from the ceiling. Aragorn creeps down the stairs and begins his search. Finding nothing of note but another set of steps leading to an eastern doorway, Aragorn signals for the party to regroup. Then Aragorn sneaks up the eastern steps to scout forward. Aragorn finds a very large oval chamber that smells of rotting vegetation and a birch casket. Double doors, east end, and double doors on the eastern end, and a single door in the northern wall. Aragorn searches, and the area around the casket for traps. Finding nothing, he goes back to gather with the party, who are still waiting back in the statue room. Regrouped, the party enters the large oval chamber and heads towards the cedar casket. "Watch out!" a strange, high-pitched voice says from the darkness. "You're about to step on a trap!" The party stops dead in their tracks. A group of 8 brownies are slinking in the shadows. "That's not true," Aragorn says to the brownies. "I've already checked this room for traps." "Better check again," says a brownie, pointing at the very floor near Aragorn's feet. Indeed, there a small panel set to trigger a trap. "You nearly stepped on it twice." The Fellowship gives the trap a wide berth, and then they speak with the brownies for a while. The brownies tell Aragorn about what can be found in this area of the dungeon. Pretty much a lot of empty rooms around here, they say. 40 XP gained for encountering the brownies. A search of the casket reveals 27 gold. And so the Fellowship decides this dungeon is well indeed tapped out, and they begin backtracking to the exit. When they reach the wide juncture, they find, unfortunately, that 3 of the spitting cobras that they scared off earlier have coiled up here. The Fellowship attempts to carefully pass through, giving the cobras a wide berth. Luckily, the cobras ignore them. 39 experience points again. The Fellowship continues their trek to the exit without further event, and thus each party member receives 54 gold and 79 experience points. Ouch! A lot of successes and a decent treasure haul for so few XP, but it's divided 8 ways, so what can you really do? More Fellowship of the Bling tomorrow. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff here. Now, one of the first things that you will note here is there's a lot of empty rooms. Now, this goes back to when I was talking about my mega dungeon description. Now, remember, this dungeon was procedurally generated, and it was procedurally generated using the rules that exist in the basic book, which has a lot of empty rooms. It's a little bit too high. It's too many empty rooms for me. That's just my personal take. Second thing that you will notice, this is Dungeons and Dragons, right? This is the combat game, right? This is the hacking and slashing game, right? This is the game where, no. Guys, they didn't really fight anything. In fact, all they did was explore and have social encounters. They scared away. They talked to the kobolds. They scared off the snakes. They encountered some brownies who gave them information and warned them about a trap that they didn't detect. Then they discovered more. They scared away a jackal because there was only one jackal and 8 party members. So it's an animal. It just saw them plus light coming from a lantern. It just said, "I'm noping the fuck out." The snakes came back and the party just avoided them. They're just animals. And then they left. Right. So that is what the game was more like. People have this mentality, this mindset of fucking Diablo. But that wasn't the game. Secondly, and this is where things get a little bit brutal. You'll notice that Aragorn, the thief, is legitimately scouting. Not like Pathfinder 2 5e scouting, like, oh, I'm going to use my passive perception or I activate the scout move. No, he's like 60 feet ahead of the party. And why? Well, for the same reason that you have a scout in real life. It's because better that the scout get ambushed and killed than the entire party and the entire unit. And D&D knows this. Thieves are very good at scouting. Now, granted, at first level, they suck. By the way, their chances to succeed at any of these things is terrible. But better than anybody else to find traps or hear noises. And the game knows this, which is why thieves required so much less experience points to level up than the other classes. Because the idea was that the game expected that your thief would die a lot. In fact, you could be 4th level, okay? Let's say your third level. Your 3rd level, the wizard's 3rd level, the elf's 3rd level, and your thief dies. And you make a new thief who's, by the way, level 1. Your thief will be level 4 before the elf and the wizard are level 4. Okay? The game literally knew that your thief was sort of a canary in the coal mine. And so the experience points, okay, to find that stuff is crazy high. Zip Zap Rap. Yes, elves do have that really high secret door finding chance, but I didn't think elves had a chance to detect traps. But again, it's been a long time since I have played BX D&D down to the millimeter. But it sounds like you're actively playing, so I will agree. I will bow to your agreement. Yes, when looking for secret doors, they are able to find them on a 1 or a 2 in a D6. That they get, but they do not get any sort of ability to detect traps. So, by the way, normal people, normal humans, halflings, whatever, can detect secret doors or hidden doors on a 1 in 6 chance, right? So 1 in 6. Elves can detect them on a 2 in 6 chance. So you're right about the 2 and 6. That's for secret doors. But traps, they do not specifically get anything bonus here. So, any case, so it's just a very different style of play. Scouting, right? Exploration-based play. Now, some of what you guys are talking about, dwarves and elves and stuff like that, some of that comes from AD&D, right? And not necessarily basic D&D. So some of it, kind of is a mixture of XP and things of that nature. Now, to be clear, dwarves in basic do have the ability, okay, to detect slanting passages, traps, shifting walls, and new construction 33% of the time, 1 and 2 on a D6, if they are actively looking for them. So again, dwarves have this incredible ability to function underground, and they're great fighters. Dwarves are absolutely a monstrous class. So, right, exactly. They've got to be like, they got to be basically dungeon traps, pit traps and that other type of stuff. Yeah. But any case, very, 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 very interesting and very cool. So then, of course, between posts, you see other people posting and stuff like that and talking about the game and, commenting or critiquing or whatever like that. And all that other stuff. So it's really good. let's see here. And so there's a lot of stuff that changed, and I see that people talking about here, but correct. So one of the things that I often lament is that those very early AD&D computer games, the ones from the 80s and even the 90s, right? They couldn't do any of this stuff. They couldn't do any of this GM exploratory stuff. So the games were just combat games. And I think those gold box games and those SSI games, Eye of the Beholder and, as Curse of the Azure Bonds and Pool of Radiance and all that other stuff, I think it really baked in this idea of just combat. And, certainly AD&D second edition, you started to see that early with the combat and tactics, which is the first time you really saw a focus on the grid-based play. Right. The first time that like flanking became the whole on either side of you type thing. And then, of course, third edition entirely made the game about combat because all your experience points came from encounters, which basically meant fighting, and there was no reaction roll and there was no morale check. So fights were to the death and everything you fought. So, right. So every time you encountered something, you fought. And every time you fought something, it fought to the death. And that became the way that people play D&D basically from, the 2000s on. And if you had played the AD&D video games, it was certainly the way that you experienced the game as well. All right. So the Fellowship of the Bling. And by the way, we're not going to go for like a super long time. I just kind of wanted to try this out. And, again, just it's late, we can just shoot the shit. But I did want to go through a couple of these posts. And maybe we'll continue to do these. Well, I don't know if people like this stuff, but we'll see how this does. But okay, the Fellowship of the Bling, again, is Aragorn, Gandalf, Frodo, Sam, Merry, Gimli, Boromir, and Legolas. So, by the way, they basically called it even. So this is another thing. Basically, the party said, that dungeon is washed, so fuck it, we're going to another one, right? So this is another classic thing that old school D&D was about, right? Like, yeah, that dungeon sucks. We're done. We're not going back to it. Like we're going to do a different dungeon. We're just going to go to a different one. So the Fellowship sets out for a new dungeon, hoping to find the riches they need to gain enough power to confront Sauron. At 79 XP per adventure, Mordor may just have to wait. Pippin is still recovering from rat fever, so Merry comes along again. So this is a new dungeon. A dark shaft descends into a dark circular chamber with a shallow puddle. Doors in each of the 4 cardinal directions. The party searches. This puddle is much deeper than it appears, says Aragorn. Watch your step. After a fruitless search, the party chooses the western door, which opens up on a large room with a grindstone and a green rug. And by the way, if this dungeon seems random, all these dungeons seem random and nonsensical, it's because it's literally being generated using a random dungeon generator. Another reason, by the way, I don't like purely random procedurally generated dungeons. But it's still kind of fun, the process. But to be clear, they do change later on. Aragorn takes an iron mirror that he finds on the floor. Doorways from this room lead north and south. Aragorn scouts ahead as the party begins moving south. He comes to a doorway, and the passageway continues west. Aragorn peeks in the doorway and sees what appears to be an empty chamber. He continues along the winding passage. The passage terminates in a small chamber where 7 little brownies are gathered around a hole in the floor. Some of them glance up at Aragorn with confused looks on their faces. Aragorn gives them a little wave. "Hey there," says Aragorn. The rest of the Fellowship catches up with Aragorn to find him chatting with some friendly brownies. After some pleasant conversation, the party backtracks down the winding corridor. 84 experience points gained. Again, remember, that's going to be divided amongst all the party members. Now, you might wonder, why are there so many? Well, because, the random encounter table from back then was pretty short. There was only so many things that was on the random encounter table from that time. Gimli and Aragorn enter the empty chamber Aragorn passed earlier and begins searching. It is a large area with a couple of doors, a passage, and a crumbling open to a sub-chamber. The sub-chamber is hazy and with blue smoke. And Aragorn finds a backpack in there with 15 gold. Frodo pockets some twine laying on the floor, and with Aragorn scouting, they take a bending passageway back to the doorway. A large chamber with fireplace, tinderbox, and fire tools. Another doorway, a closed door that leads back to the circular entry chamber that they originally entered. Aragorn searches while the party catches up. Suddenly, 8 giant, poisonous frogs leap through the doorway where Aragorn is searching. Fortunately, the rest of the Fellowship has just arrived. Unfortunately, they are surprised by the fast-leaping frogs of death. The frogs crash into the party. It is now a pitched battle with frogs, halflings, humans, and a dwarf all mixed up in the chaos. Some are dropping bows and jerking swords from scabbards. 3 of the savage frogs assail Merry, but the shield and plate make it tough to get through. But one does manage to get a bite in, and for a moment, Merry swoons under the toxin, but the rugged halfling endures. Legolas is also bitten by one of the 2 frogs, but he perseveres. Toads are leaping everywhere, snapping at Frodo and Gimli in the confusing melee. But now the party has regrouped and has begun fighting back. So, we'll keep going. Gimli hacks a frog in twain with his mighty axe. Sam rushes to Merry's aid, and Aragorn hurls a hand axe at a frog, but misses. More confused swings of blade and axe. Boromir wounds the frog assailing him, but does not slay it. 3 of the beasts continue to press in on Merry, but the hobbit holds his ground. Giant frogs leap and snap at armor and shields, trying to overwhelm the frightened party. More fruitless strikes of blade. Then Aragorn draws his sword and moves in for a backstab on one of the 3 frogs assailing Merry. Aragorn was outside of the general melee because he was searching the room when the frogs attacked, so he was in the corner. Note, you can only backstab, like basically once a fight and if the enemy is completely unaware of you. But alas, the frog leaps, and Aragorn's blade misses its mark. Blast! Screams Aragorn as the frog now turns to engage him. Gimli rushes to Frodo's side and wounds a frog. Boromir runs his sword through the frog, killing it. Merry, Sam, and Aragorn coordinate their attacks against 3 frogs, slaying one, injuring another. Gimli destroys a frog with a mighty axe, much to the beleaguered Frodo's relief. Gandalf provides much-needed aid to Legolas by somehow driving a dagger into a frog's eye and killing it. A bloodied toad clamps down on Aragorn's wrist and bites hard. Ah! Aragorn's vision swims as the toxins flood into his bloodstream. He collapses. Aragorn is slain! Sam hacks down the toad trying to swallow Aragorn's body. Legolas, Frodo, and Gandalf battle another toad, injuring it. Boromir finishes off a frog with a bloody sword. Only 2 frogs left, but they keep fighting until they are finally slain. The Fellowship regroups, mourning the falling Aragorn. 128 experience points. Gandalf, let us search a few more rooms, in the hopes that Aragorn's death will not be in vain. Then we must return to Rivendell and recruit a new scout. With that, the Fellowship cautiously enters the doorway from which the giant frogs came. A cold, square chamber, fetid and cold. Gimli examines a rosewood coffer in the room and discovers a golden anklet worth 700 gold pieces. Loot found. The Fellowship decides to exit the dungeon. Gandalf says, "We shall return to this place." Each member receives 115 gold and 145 experience points. For starters, I don't know if you're still here, but screw you, Ron. I did not play racquetball tonight because my racquetball partner was stout. Secondly, for those of you who are unaware, the way that poison worked in basic D&D was if you got bit or affected by poison, from a poisoned trap or a poisoned needle or a poisoned frog, you make a saving throw because you just got poisoned. And if you fail the saving throw, you die. So every single time one of these frogs bit these characters, not only could they just die from hit point loss, they had to make a saving throw or die. You could actually think of it this way. It's almost like saving throws were plot armor. Because realistically, if you got bit by a poison frog, you would just die. And the game was like, well, that's not really heroic. So we're going to give you a chance to save yourself. Sure, it's kind of bullshit. You should just die. But you know what? Well, this is a heroic game with larger than life heroes from our favorite Conan novels and Elric novels. So we're going to give them a chance to live. Okay, so the fact that you even got a chance to live was seen as like this great, powerful benefit to being a hero. So needless to say, that was what a combat was like because, again, clearly a random encounter, 8 poisonous frogs. They were surprised. Surprise meant that the enemy got to do an entire round of combat. When any single bite from a frog could kill you, imagine how terrifying it was to be bitten and to be surprised by a frog. So somebody asked, what was the saving throw of the feater? Great question. By the way, we can see here at first level, these are the percent chances that a thief has to open locks, find and remove traps, pick pockets, move silently, climb surfaces, and hear noise. By the way, so we can see here, Aragorn is just as good at hearing noise as the elf, by the way. So there you go. He has a 1 in 5, 1 in 2 on a D6. This means on a D6. Yes, inexplicably, right? Percentage, and then you roll on a D6. So go figure. Cinnabos says, I was too slow to look it up. Okay, so you guys got it. It was 12. So what that means is that if a fighter was bitten by or suffered poison, they had to roll a 12 or higher on a D20, okay, or die. Where are saving throws in the basic book? You would think that they would be with playing. No, yeah, it's back in like the combat section of the game. There we go. Here it is. So here are our characters' saving throws. So in the case of poison, which is this first column, you can see that dwarves and halflings need a 10 or higher on a D20. So they have a 55% chance of making it. Whereas, a magic user or a thief needs a 13 or higher. So, yeah. Not great. So roughly 50-50, roughly, at best, right? Not great. All right. So Aragorn is slain. Alas. And then again, people talking and shouting them on and all this other stuff. And again, this is also sort of this person sort of, seeing the game through the eyes of a bunch of people who only played 3rd edition, so sometimes he has this really great insight into the game, where, and he says, I have, and this is funny because this kind of goes to a conversation we were having earlier today on the Discord, not about BX D&D, but just about games in general, playing games and approaching games in the spirit for which they are presented. So he's replying to a quote from someone earlier, and the person earlier said, it's something I never really got as a kid. I'd played a bit of D&D with older kids, but for the most part, I was a self-taught DM who only ever DM'd. I'd played some video games like Ultima and Wizardry. It made sense to me at 13 or so that the answer was to kill every motherfucker in the room. In fairness, the comprehensive lists of monsters, weapons, and combat spells certainly reinforces this. I'm not sure if any of my gaming groups ever hired hirelings or henchling. And then, continued the quote. And Mailer, who is, again, the OP, the person who's posting, the GM from this game, says, I have found that playing the game mostly by the rules, as intended, is a lot more fun than trying to force it to be something it isn't. I had similar experiences to yours in my younger days. When I was a kid, I wouldn't even reward XP for gold because I thought it was unrealistic. And the game shouldn't be about grabbing loot. It should be about slaying monsters instead. Now I realize that XP for loot adds an extra dimension of strategy to the game. The goal is to grab treasure from a dangerous environment. How you do that is up to you. Plus, XP for treasure just makes that gold glimmer all the more brightly in characters' eyes. In the Middle Ages or in the modern time, money rules the world. All right. We'll do another one here. Yes. So yeah, like that's the whole point that people were even saying, like, you know, you get award just for seeing a monster and it still doesn't do anything. And you know what, Neutromancer, it even kind of drives home the point even further where you're like, if you kill every single one of these creatures, or if you just look at them, I'm going to give you the experience points for them. Here's 80 experience points, you know? So Aragorn is dead. Pippin is still out. So we have a new character, Bard, the thief, with 3 hit points. The Fellowship hires a scout and a huntsman named Bard to fill Aragorn's shoes. Pippin has also recovered from his rat fever, but feels pretty cool with hanging around Rivendell. So Merry stays in the party instead. They return to the dungeon where Aragorn was slain and descend the dark shaft, the circular chamber with 4 doors. They take the eastern door, leading to the room where Aragorn died. Rotting giant frog carcasses litter the room. They take the northern doorway, where they found the valuable anklet. Listening at a door in the eastern wall, hearing nothing, so Bard and Gimli enter. A tremendous rectangular chamber. And as soon as they search, Gimli spots a loose floor stone. Watch out, that's a trap. They continue searching when they hear a dry, rattling sound come from the shadowy other end of this huge room. 6 skeletons emerge from the darkness. Gandalf! Gimli yells out as he and Bard fall back to join the others. Gandalf and the crew charge in, ready to fight. The skeletons advance, and soon the 2 sides have formed battle lines. Legolas, Bard, and Frodo draw bowstrings and unleash a volley of arrows into the charging skeletons. The arrows crash through the undead, bursting one apart and cracking off a few ribs from another. The rest of the Fellowship braces for the skeletal charge. Crash! Swords, shields, and axes ring out. A jagged short sword crashes into Gimli's neck, and the dwarf goes down, blood spurting in a red jet. Gimli is slain! The battle is joined. Archers switch to melee weapons and steel, flesh, and bone clash. Boromir screams out as a skeleton strikes him. Another skeleton knocks aside Sam's side sword and lunges in for a deep stab. Sam is slain. Sam! Frodo screams as he smashes the skeleton who hurt Sam. Its bones clatter to the floor. Boromir smashes another one to pieces. The battle rages on. 3 skeletons remaining. But soon, the Fellowship is victorious. Gimli and Sam lay among a heap of bones. They have breathed their last. 78 experience points. 3 brave and noble companions lost in this insidious dungeon, Gandalf reflects. Let us leave this place and never return. The Fellowship of the Bling leaves the dungeon with a heavy heart and no further events. Each member receives 13 experience points and no treasure. So now again, there's a lot of things to be said about this. So number one, legit. By the time the party gets back, so like, you know, Gimli is slain. Cool. Gimli goes, shit, you know, and he goes, okay, I'm gonna go get a soda. I'm gonna, go eat some pizza. By the time Gimli gets back, and by the time the party gets back to Rivendell and goes back to the dungeon again, it's BX D&D. The player of Gimli could literally have rolled up a new character. Like, it literally takes 3 or 4 minutes. It takes no amount of time. Okay. Secondly, now they have 8 people, but it is very common for people to also have hirelings and henchmen, retainers, they were called in BX D&D. And when your main character died, you just took over playing your retainer for a little while. Maybe your retainer became your new main character, or maybe when you got back to town, you got made a new main character. But regardless, you still got to keep playing. Hey, play the man at arms for a while. There was this kind of removal of importance from the individual character, and it was really all about the party. Thirdly, I think it's really important to note just how much more dramatic the game is when you just die at 0. Bleeding out creates a lot of actual problems. We could go into that in a whole separate discussion, but it removes a lot of the tension from the game. It's obviously a huge safety net, but it also creates this weird problem where now you feel like you have this requirement to get the person back into the game. And it sort of dictates your change. And I get it. Like, I always say, I don't like stun. I don't like paralysis. I don't like when people are taken out of the game. That's true. I don't. But there's this weird sort of release that happens when you're just straight up killed. I know it sounds stupid. But I would almost rather kill a PC and you're dead. It's not like, oh, you're negative, you're bleeding out. No, you're just dead. You're dead. There's no coming back from it. You're dead. You can get up. You can leave. You don't have to worry about anything. The question has been answered. That, to me, in a weird way, is preferable to being stunned. It's crazy, I know, but it is a thing. And Nutrimancer, I also talk about how a lot of the things that like funnels and stuff are trying to recreate was sort of an emergent property of the style of play from game. All right, we'll do one more. Now, Wes, it depends on what you want from a game, obviously. If you really want, deep immersion storytelling, it's not great for that. Completely not good for that. But again, it's this idea of, I always call D&D, right? It's gambling for nerds. And like the original fantasy adventure game was very much predicated upon this. Like these are the roots of the hobby. Again, it has really evolved and we have a lot of really great games that do stuff that's very different from this. And to call all of this role-playing games is crazy because like compare this to like Wander Home, or Ryutama or Chubo's Marvelous Wish Granting Engine, right? It's night and day. Also, just to point out, kind of Rhesus here saying something about the running away from the undead. Think about how horrifying. I mean, those undead were horrifying, right? I mean, you encounter brownies, you encounter kobolds. They might be your friend. They might hang out. They might want to shoot the shit. If you fight animals, they might just run away. Skeletons always attack. Okay. And they fight to the death. Now, what's really funny about that, the reason why that's so funny to me is because what made undead so unbelievably terrifying in the early versions of D&D was that they attacked on sight. They always attacked and they fought to the death. And that's what made them terrifying. And somehow in modern D&D, in modern RPGs, that literally describes every single monster. You know what I mean? Like every single monster. So it's so funny that like what made them this horrifying creature is now basically the default. I mean, think about all the adventures that you've run in D&D and Pathfinder or whatever. 99% of the time, right? The monsters attack, they fight to the death. Whether it's a boss or some random, monsters in a room, What's up, Wargasm? Good to see you. Elrond gets involved later, Dr. Stevel. He actually shows up later. Correct. Zip Zap Rap. Yeah, Zip Zap Rap is obviously a pro, You have this long time between turns. In a very real way, a stun forces you to stay at the table, right? But you're not doing anything. If you die, you can just, get up and leave, play on your phone for a little bit. Obviously, we didn't have phones back then, but or you take over a henchman. And by the way, these combat rounds are probably taking 5 minutes. I mean, when I say combat round, I mean everyone's goes. I have run combats between 12 12 goblins and 7 players, so it's 19 monsters or 19 people, right, between players and monsters. 19 participants in a combat, and the combat rounds probably took, a couple of minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Now, here's the thing. Were they super hyper detailed, and was I breaking down my 5 action economy, and was I using my bonus action and figuring out a way to calculate a +1 while, subtracting this meta currency to add this meta currency to give a +2 floating bonus, but then no, it was very, very basic. It was just like, God, please, no. But it doesn't, you don't need a lot of tactical thing for the game to be really interesting when one hit could kill you, When the difference between life and death could literally be this next die roll. So it's again, I call it gambling for nerds. A lot of casino games are quite boring. Roll the dice and see if you roll a number. That's boring. Okay, but put $100 on it, and suddenly you're like, oh shit, I'm really I could win so much money here, or I could lose it all. So it's. That's right. We talked about owlbears, right? Owlbears attacked on sight and fought to the death. They were basically undead super monsters, right? They were scary as shit. Right, exactly. Cash on the table suddenly skyrockets the dopamine, correct. Yes, I think it was tactical, but in a different way. There's sort of, you could argue maybe it was more strategic in a weird way rather than tactical. It was definitely a different style, for sure. All right, so we got new characters. We got Bard, who, by the way, replaced Aragorn, our slain thief. We have Nilfin. I don't even know if that's from Lord of the Rings, actually. A cleric 1. I guess they decided they needed a cleric. Pippin is back after recovering from the rat fever. Though Pippin was enjoying a nice vacation at Rivendell, he was forced back into the Fellowship after the loss of Gimli and Sam. Gandalf also felt, after the deadly encounters with the skeletons, that the Fellowship should recruit a holy man, so the cleric Nilfin became one of the team. They set out for a new dungeon, one hopefully less harrowing than the last. So this is dungeon number 3, by the way. They descend the stone steps into a dark chamber with a statue in one corner. Lamplight reveals a wall painting of a jungle. 4 large, vulture-like birds with crimson feathers are perched on top of a maple casket. Instead of beaks, they have strange, mosquito-like proboscises. I never can say that word. Sturges, yells Boromir. The dangerous birds take flight and the Fellowship goes into actions. Arrow and sling stones tear through the approaching birds, crimson feathers drifting in a lazy red cloud. Only one of the tough old birds goes down, though. The Sturges dive down into the party, but are turned away by mail and shield. Birds flapping all around them, everyone goes for blade or mace, dropping ranged weapons down to the ground. Soon, the Sturges are all whacked out of the air. 4 red carcasses crumbled upon the floor. 64 experience points. Everyone remains near the stairs while Bard and Legolas search the room. Under some debris, they find a very special sword, a +2 sword. Boromir takes up the magic sword and prepares to fulfill a destiny of greatness. I shall call this sword Usurper, Boromir exclaims. 2 doors exit this room, and the Fellowship chooses the west one. Bard scouts ahead. A passage leads to a fork, and the Fellowship heads south. Eventually, the corridor takes a sharp turn, and the party continues down the long, dark corridor, with Bard, their thief, well in advance carrying his own torch. A sudden, buzzing sound, and Bard is startled by 6 giant killer bees emerging from the darkness, but they buzz right past him. "Bees!" Bard yells out to his companions who are further down the corridor. The Fellowship draws their bowstrings and load their slings, bracing for the approaching bees. As the 6 dangerous insects approach, a volley is unleashed. Arrows and stones soar through the passage, but only one of the nimble bees is hit. That is when Gandalf completes his invocation. Sleep is cast. The remaining bees dive bomb to the stone floor, where the Fellowship proceeds to stomp them to death. 42 XP. Gandalf has finally cast his spell, which is sleep. And so the Fellowship continues on until Bard reaches the opening of a large juncture. About then, 5 little sprites buzz through the juncture on membranous wings. Bard is easily spotted holding the torch. They seem curious, and they start buzzing all around Bard. Bard tries to reassure him that he meant no harm, and still they don't respond. Still buzzing around, some of them holding little daggers. Some sort of glittery pixie dust is drifting through the air. Bard tries again to speak with the sprites. The sprites make a few spirals, form up, and soar down the hall towards Bard's companions. "Sprites!" Bard yells out. Some of the Fellowship begin knocking arrow, but Gandalf puts up a hand to stop them. "Well, hello, little ones." The sprites instantly warm up to Gandalf, and soon they are buzzing around his bearded head, chatting incessantly. The sprites tell Gandalf about a secret door further down the passageway, and then buzz away off into darkness. The Fellowship regroups in the large juncture. According to the sprites, the secret door is at the end of this passage, and so they journey until they reach a dead end, and after a few moments of examination, they do indeed locate a secret door. Ear to the wall reveals no sound, and so they cautiously open it. A large, oddly shaped chamber with a couple of doors. Bard and Legolas enter to search. The area has a clean smell and is otherwise empty. They listen at doors, and behind one door they hear gently speaking voices. Boromir gently opens this door. Inside, 7 hobbits sit on a circle of grungy cushions. The hobbits seem a bit startled when the Fellowship enters the room, and they leap to their feet. Gandalf steps forward to assure them, "Relax, little ones, we are friends." A few of the hobbits recognize Gandalf from his travels through the Shire, and soon they are sharing hobbit pipe leaf. The friendly hobbits explain that they are from the farms of Hillshire, and that they are here trying to earn their fortune. But they've grown tired of this expedition, and so after finishing off a load of pipe leaf, they plan to leave. They point out a secret door in the room and tell Gandalf that it leads back to the exit. Gandalf notes this on his map. Eventually, the two groups part ways. 35 experience points added. The Fellowship takes a dark eastern passage and quickly come to a door. It opens onto another passage, and so rather than enter it, the party maintains their current direction eastward. Bard, well in the lead, comes to a doorway. A large room with a lot of furnishings, chests, drawers. Bard begins to search, immediately spotting blood on the ceiling. Soon, Legolas joins the search, while the others remain back in the corridor. Legolas looks for secret doors, but the only thing of note here are a few regular doors, and a rocky passage leading back to the entrance, if Gandalf's map is to be correct. Suddenly, one of the door opens. The Fellowship takes position, knocking arrows and loading slings. 2 heavily browed Neanderthals enter, wearing nothing but animal skins on their loins and a pelt of black hair. Upon seeing a large, well-equipped party, the Neanderthals immediately retreat back the way they came. Hopefully they aren't going to come back in larger numbers. They listen at the one still unopened door. Sounds like it's full of bats. Let's not open this door. The Fellowship decides to take the passageway that the Neanderthals retreated back into, with Bard running recon about 40 feet ahead. It takes some turns and twists until it reaches a fork, with the northern passage leading to a set of stone stairs. "Who knows what horrors lay down there," says Gandalf. "We shall turn back." And with that, the Fellowship backtracks. Eventually, they come to a doorway, a small chamber, dank and moldy. Bard slips in to search, finding 3 zircon gems in a concealed panel, each worth 40 gold. Eventually, the others join Bard. Upon seeing the gems, Boromir says, "If 3 zircons is the best this dungeon has to offer, then I say we leave. You did find that really cool sword." And that is when one of the 2 doors of the room open, and 11 brownies enter. They draw daggers, and their disposition seems uncertain. Gandalf tries to de-escalate the situation, and Bard quietly pockets the zircons. The brownies do not seem friendly.
"This is our territory, and when we return, you had better be gone."
The brownies leave the way they came. 60 XP. "Yes," Gandalf finally agrees. "Let us leave this strange and stingy dungeon." The fellowship leaves without further event. Each member receives 15 gold and 45 experience points. So, a couple of things. Number one, magical items were not worth experience points. The value of the magic item was in getting the magic item. Treasure was treasure. And by the way, treasure doesn't mean random bits of loot and rusted swords and old leather. No, treasure means treasure. So this is another common mistake that people would frequently make. They just thought that you got treasure, that you got experience points for gold value. And so there was like all these stories of people like, stripping, every creature of every single thing they had, trying to sell every belt pouch and sell every random rusty dagger they found. And the fact of the matter is that wasn't treasure, right? Treasure meant coins, gems, jewels, jewelry, pieces of art, or fine craft. So you really wanted, it had to be legitimately treasure. And amongst the treasure, Platinum says art was the best treasure. I actually counter that, I think gems in many ways were the best treasure. Now, art could certainly be the most valuable find. You might find a beautifully decorated armoire that is worth 5,000 gold. But getting it out was a real challenge. The advantage to gems was that their value to encumbrance ratio was insane, right? And so they were very pocketable. They were very, discreet, distinct. Art tended to be very difficult to transport, either because of its size or because of it, could it be like a tapestry? It could be like a solid gold throne, and just getting it out of the dungeon sometimes became a whole adventure in and of itself. And by the way, you can see some of this if you ever go and watch our Torchbearer campaigns. Sometimes the party would find something very valuable, but it took up a lot of slots in their inventory. Torchbearer uses slots instead of a weight system, but it's the same basic idea, right? How do we get this out of there? Gems were very, very lightweight, but it can be very valuable for their weight. And so, classic example. But again, reiterating, when you read this is, yes, okay, sure. We had a couple people die so far, but, think about how different this is. It's mostly exploring rooms, mapping, making leaps of logic, having encounters with monsters that talk to you, that go back and forth, that you negotiate with, that give you information about other parts of the dungeon, right? It's so different from what we think of when we think about not just modern D&D, but even like the mentality that the OSR, I think, personally, has done a job of cultivating, which is this sort of like, it's this like grim, dark, everyone hates you, it's a meat grinder, everything's death on a stick, and it's like, yes, your characters were frail, yes, your characters could die, but, the way that the rules of the system worked, a lot of times encounters resulted in the monsters not fighting or noping out very quickly in case of an event. And so there was a lot more social. True story. What we've read so far is probably about 2 sessions worth of games. I think there's still a little bit more. Because remember, each adventure isn't one session, right? You could have multiple adventures in a session. I'm willing to bet that this party of BX Adventurers has had more social type encounters right? With the kobolds, with the brownies, with the hobbits, with the second group of brownies, with the pixies, than most of you have in your traditional, Pathfinder 2 or D&D game, right? So it's, yes, there's parts of the OSR that gets it right. Yes, characters are frail. Yes, you weren't a superhero. Yes, you could be killed by a single skeleton stabbing you in the neck with a rusty short blade. But also, it wasn't this kind of like Diablo, combat grinder that they make it seem like. And there was also an element to the game that, quite frankly, was, I don't want to say it was like lighthearted or a bit silly. But when we look at the random encounter tables, for a level 1 monster, let me see if I can pull this up here. Yeah, here we go. So this is, by the way, what this GM has been running on. This is literally what you can encounter as a random encounter. All right. So we can see the halflings. We can see the killer bees. We can see the kobolds. Right. We can see the spitting snakes, the cobras. We can see the skeletons. We can see the sturges. Okay. And look how many show up. A lot. Oh, there's the skeletons, right? We encountered the skeletons. Those were random encounters. So you're encountering 3d4 skeletons, when you encounter them. So, it's, and you can see that there's a wide range of creatures that you might encounter here, And by the way, I don't know why they rolled on this. Let's see here. Oh, I know why. Because I think when you roll randomly, there's a chance that you might roll on the higher level chart. So sometimes when you're on level 1 and you roll on the higher chart, you upgrade to the next level, right? And that's where you can see things like the Neanderthal, right? Which is on the second chart. So sometimes, they would throw you a curveball and they'd say, hey, you're on level 1 of the dungeon. You're only going to cover level 1 of the dungeon. But yeah, so again, it's definitely like I said, it's definitely a scary game in that regard. And then also, as we look at this table, you can see that, I'm trying to find it real quick. Here we go. When you find a magical item, depends on what treasure type you find, but, there's a chance of a magical item. And when you roll it, you roll a D8. And these are the magic swords that you could find, right? And this is whether you're level 1 or level 2 or level 3 or level 4. If you find a magic sword, it could be a +1 sword. It could be a +1 sword +2 against lycanthropes. A +1 sword +2 against spell users. A +1 sword +3 against undead. Or you could get the big daddy sword +2. But it wasn't like, and again, you might say, well, isn't that busted? Isn't that broken? Well, no, because the game wasn't really about any sort of concept of balance in that sort of way or respect. And in fact, I'd argue that having a +2 sword, in some ways, it meant more back in the old days because there were certain creatures that couldn't even be harmed unless you had a magical item. It wasn't like they had damage reduction. No. They were literally immune to your weapon unless you had a magic weapon. So just an absolute, and that's just so fun. This is a level 1 fighter who has a +2 sword now. The party has a +2 sword. It's awesome. Or are they? You know what I mean? And to a certain extent, Cinnabos, right? Like the character is replaceable. The sword is not. You know what I mean? So it's almost kind of like, who will, your character might die, right? But the sword goes on, right? There's this idea, right, that the party, right, like the party comes first, You know, that's kind of like this idea, I think, is that the party comes first. So we'll do, it's 1 a.m. We'll do one more. So he's saying here, and I mean, again, I read this a long time ago, but, you know, the entire sprite encounter was the result of interesting reaction rolls. They came at Bard in an uncertain mode. Bard tried to talk to them, and I got another uncertain, continuing negotiation results. I narrated the pixie dust and the little daggers, and Bard got nervous. He tried to talk to them again, and I rolled a leave result, so I sent the sprites down the hall, and I kept them in uncertain disposition. When they arrived, Gandalf stepped forward and greeted the little ones. Gandalf has a decent charisma score, so he rolled friendly right out of the uncertain table, and so at that point, they warmed up to the old wizard. And that brings up a really interesting point, which is that charisma was far from a dump stat, because charisma was used to modify that reaction roll, which in other words meant that having a person with high charisma in your party, or two, literally meant that you could turn a fight into a negotiation, or at the very least, you might turn it into sort of a, you know, a standoff, or a, you know, you go your way, we'll go our way, you know, kind of like a neutral, you know, agreement, rather than a fight, because a fight could just quite frankly kill you, and really usually offer you no benefit, you know. All right, the Fellowship of the Bling is our party that we've seen before here. All right, we'll do this. This will be our last one for the night. The Fellowship of the Bling is Bard, a thief, Gandalf, a magic user, Frodo, a halfling, Nilfin, a cleric, Merry and Pippin, both halflings, Boromir, fighter, also now with a +2 sword, usurper, Legolas. After some time resting up in Rivendell, the Fellowship of the Bling sets out once again for adventure. They find a new dungeon with stone steps descending to darkness. For those of us keeping track at home, that is dungeon number 4. They cautiously navigate the corridor until coming upon a door. Bard hears voices speaking gently through the door. They open the door to find 2 deep elves in the process of searching the empty room. The elves heard them outside and have already drawn their long swords. They seem ready to attack when Gandalf tells them to stay their hand. Soon he has calmed the haughty elves of the Underdark. Likely, if the elves were in greater numbers, they may not have been so friendly. On the far side of the room is a half-open secret door. "What's in there?" says Boromir, pointing at the secret opening. The haughty elves claim they just opened it and do not know what lies inside. "Well, then I'm sure you won't mind if we take a look," says Bard, pushing past the deep elves. Bard enters the small, secret chamber. Putrid-smelling, scattered chess set pieces, and a fireplace. Bard begins searching the small room. Meanwhile, the deep elves depart. Soon, Bard emerges from the chamber. Whatever was in there, those deep elves already got it. "Damn their deep elven hides!" exclaims Boromir. The Fellowship listens at the other door, in the deep elf room, but hears nothing. It opens onto an entryway into a medium-sized chamber. Bard and Legolas enter, smelling of rotten meat. Manacles hang from the wall, and a half-eaten orc lies chained to the wall. They find a few odds and ends, a holy symbol, some dice, a magnifying lens. Under a broken bench, Bard finds a pouch with 21 gold. Finding nothing else, the party returns to the original corridor. Just as they enter the corridor, 11 brownies approach from the direction of the exit. They must have just come from outside. Gandalf steps forward to speak and realizes that these must be the very brownies, or these are the very brownies they encountered in the previous dungeon, the unfriendly ones who ordered them to leave. "They must have followed us," Gandalf thought.
You stole our zircons,
one of the brownies asserts. Gandalf, I assure you, we did not know that those zircons belonged to you. If you return with us to Rivendell, we would be glad to pay you double for the lost gems.
You'll pay now, wizard, says the brownie, in blood.
the brownies draw daggers, and the fellowship flies into action. Several of the brownies in the back rank begin chanting and gesticulating. Blinding lights appear in the faces of several of the fellowship. Some resist the magic, but Bard, Merry, Gandalf, and Boromir are blinded. Remaining brownies charge in with dagger. Nilfin blocks with shield, and though Gandalf is blind, he manages to avoid the slashing daggers of two angry brownies. Boromir clashes with a forward brownie. Legolas, Pippin, and Frodo fire a volley into the back ranks of the brownies, but nothing finds its mark. That's when Gandalf completes his invocation, a sleep spell cast upon the back of the ranks of the brownie formation. All the brownies in the back ranks fall to the floor, unconscious. Only the 4 brownies fighting in the front remain standing. Merry is too blinded to fight effectively, but Nilfin, the cleric, smashes a brownie's skull in with mace. Boromir clashes with another, but blinded, his magic sword does not find its mark. Though only 3 remain, they are so enraged about the Zircons that they press the attack. Steel rings out, and one of them slashes Gandalf's forearm with a dagger. Merry lashes out blindly, and Nilfin bashes down another with mace. Though blinded, Gandalf, furious about his wounded forearm, totally prison shanks a brownie with dagger, and it crumbles to the floor. The last one lashes out, but then Nilfin charges over and bashes in yet a 3rd brownie with mace. Fight over. Nilfin says, "Excuse me for a moment," and steps aside to shake all the chunks of brownie brain off his mace. 122 experience points. After a moment to rest, Gandalf says, "I am wounded, and myself and 3 others blinded by this infernal light, and I do not want to be around when these brownies wake up. We must retreat for now." "We should slay the little miscreants," says Boromir. "I will not murder beings like these while they sleep," says Frodo. "Nor will I, Frodo, nor will I," Gandalf reassures the hobbit. And so they retreat for a brief rest at Rivendell, each member receiving 3 gold and 21 experience points. So what I think is important to note about what we just read is all of this was random, and it was the results of the dice, and it was the GM connecting random events together. They totally just had another random encounter with a large group of brownies, which is on the table. The GM just thought it would be like, oh, we'll make it the same brownies from the previous dungeon. Then, clearly, those brownies rolled a aggressive reaction roll, right? Probably attack immediately or super unfriendly or whatever. And the GM thought, oh, well, the last time we encountered the brownies, they told them to get the shit out, and they were suspicious because the party, had taken the gems. And so all that happened was the dice said, the brownies are, angry and will probably attack. It was the GM connecting that random roll of reaction, that random roll of brownies, and then their random reaction roll, which was aggressive, and connecting it with a totally different random group of brownies from a prior dungeon, and the totally random finding of the Zircons, and their totally random reaction roll last time, which was probably, unfriendly, not hostile, but unfriendly. And then basically building a narrative together and basically saying, oh, it'll be the same brownies. Well, why are they hostile? Oh, they're mad because last time they told you to get the fuck out and they think you stole the gems. And, they were very angry, and Gandalf tried to assuage things, and the GM probably made another reaction roll, maybe with a bonus, maybe with a penalty, and probably got attacks. And so the brownies came in and slashed and attacked. Another thing to note is, someone mentions this, clerics did not even get a spell at level 1. The clerics don't get a spell until level 2. However, they were very proficient fighters, and you can see that at this point in the game, nobody's really a good fighter. Like stats don't mean as much. We're used to 18 being like, oh, that's a +4, and no, that wasn't the case. Number one, nobody had an 18. At number 2, the stats worked very differently in BX D&D than they did in a modern game. Now, that's not to say that having good stats was a bad thing, far from it. But noted that if we go take a look at, note that even having a 12 gave you no benefit to hit or damage. A 13 and a 14 and a 15 only gave you a +1. And a 16 or a 17 gave you a +2. And an 18, which again, super rare on 3d6, gave you a +3. So, having, and by the way, everyone, I mean, granted, as you gain more levels, the fighter definitely became a better fighter. But fundamentally, the real advantage of the fighter in terms of attack roll bonus accuracy came mostly from the fact that they could just use better weapons. They could use a longsword. They could use a warhammer. Whereas if you were, a cleric, you were stuck using maces and bludgeoning weapons. If you were a wizard or a thief, you used shitty daggers and slings. Also, ability scores were random. So your wizard might randomly just have a 16 strength score. And you might actually be one of the most accurate people in the fighter or in the party. So yeah. Now it is true, you can trade out for your prime attribute, whatever your prime attribute is. You could subtract 2 and add 1 to your prime attribute. Talk about that here? Yeah. But no ability score can be lower than 9. So there you go. And if you're a wizard, you can only lower strength. That's the only stat that you can lower. Now, Real Nutrimancer says, so that 16 strength mage would probably end up lowering to 12 for a couple extra in points. It is possible. It is possible. However, I want to note that this is the only thing intelligence did in basic D&D. This is it. It's the only thing it did. There was no such thing as DCs. There was no such thing as, what's my spell DC? What's the DC of my fireball? What's the DC of my charm spell? That didn't exist. Now, it did potentially give you +5% experience points or 10% experience points. You are correct, Real Nutrimancer. If your prime attribute was high enough. I'm not saying that you wouldn't increase your intelligence if you were a wizard. You probably would, and you probably should. However, all it really did was give you additional languages. Who cares? Well, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but being able to speak a creature's language means that when they don't attack you, you could potentially negotiate with them and, try to, get more, quote unquote, out of them, It's not really a apparent. Nope. Chance to learn spell. All of that stuff comes later from AD&D. Now, don't get me wrong. AD&D changed it up. Changed the math on it a little bit. AD&D was a very different animal. Gary made it a very different game. AD&D was much more required for wizards in that respect. But yeah. Now, I see people talking about cleaving. I will say that in my we have the poll here. In my set of Derek's basic Dungeons and Dragons house rules, I do have cleaving rules. So I don't think they were actually in BX. I think that it was a common house rule, kind of taken over from, I don't know why that popped up. There we go. I did have, dwarves could use cleaving, elves could use cleaving, fighters could use cleaving. So, anyways, that is a common house rule. I think that a lot of people used, and kind of came out of AD&D and a little bit different in that respect. Anyways, the main thing about fighters is that they could use any type of weapon, armor, or shield. That was the main advantage. It even says here, though they have no special abilities, fighters are very powerful characters. They have more hit points, stronger armor, many weapons, and great strength, making them a necessary part of every party of adventures. So, anyways, fighters were still going to fight, but they weren't like. It's not like fighters were the only people. You know what I mean? Like when everything has like 2 or 3 hit points, even a wizard could still take somebody out. But that being said, a fighter with a shield and good armor, they might have, in D&D terms, right, like modern terms, they might have the equivalent of like AC 19 or 20. And a lot of these creatures were attacking with a +0 or a +1 to hit. So, you might only be hit 10% of the time if you were a fighter. You were pretty defensive for sure. Now also, we are talking about, we're talking about, so, the thing about basic D&D you have to realize is like, there's this, right? There's this basic D&D. There's this, this 60-page booklet, which includes, the whole GM section. Really, it's only 13, or it's really only 30 pages. This is basic D&D. So when some people say basic D&D, they mean this. Other people, technically they are correct. When they say basic D&D, they mean this. Okay, this is the rules cyclopedia. This is an edited and combined and updated version of BECME D&D, which goes up to level 36 and has weapon mastery rules and a whole host of spells and a whole other things. Somehow, technically, these are both basic D&D, but obviously, they're very different animals in that respect. So, it's kind of a whole thing. Anyways, so, basic D&D covers a wide swath of meaning in that respect. Now, that being said, Derek's house rules for basic Dungeons and Dragons. Ability scores. Every point of bonus or penalty strength corresponds to a plus or minus 200 coin carrying capacity. Per normal BX D&D rules, encumbrance was not affected by your strength. So in my version, if you had a higher strength, or if you had a strength bonus or strength penalty, you could carry more encumbrance. And encumbrance in BX D&D was literally calculated in coin weight. And that's because the thing that was changing all the time and that you were adding and subtracting constantly were mostly coins. So even like weapons and armor, the weight was expressed in coins. Crazy, right? Pursuant to what we were just talking about. Intelligence. Each additional language that an elf or magic user knows will allow them to begin play with an additional spell in their spell book. By default, 1. So in mine, if you had a high int as an elf or magic user, you might be able to start with 2 or 3 spells in your book. Bonus intelligence can be used for thief skills. See thief class. Dexterity. Bonus can be used for thief skills. See thief class. Okay, thieves. Each point of bonus dexterity can be used to raise by +5%, open locks, pickpockets, move silently, or hide in shadows. Each point of intelligence bonus can be used to raise by +5%, open locks, or find remove traps. Dwarves are able to use the cleaving rule. Elves are able to use the cleaving rule. Fighters are able to use the cleaving rules. Fighters also get a +1 damage bonus at level 1. which I think I frequently actually usually, it says +1 here, but I almost always made it +2. In other words, I let fighters do 2 extra points of damage. Like if a fighter hit, I wanted them to kill. Now, what is cleaving? The source I have written here is the source, Dave Arneson. Fighters, dwarves, and elves may make 1 additional attack per round if they kill their foe. So basically, if an elf or a dwarf or a fighter drops their foe, they can make an additional bonus attack. Hit points. I use modified hit point rolls. Source, Gary Gygax. Now, I say source Gary Gygax, but this is really kind of my thing. Fighters get to roll a d10. Dwarves get to roll a d12. Clerics roll a d8. Halflings and elves roll d8s. Thieves roll d6s. Magic users d4. Also, a player may re-roll any roll of 1 or 2 on their hit point rolls. Again, these are just my house rules. Equipping a character. A cost to acquire a henchman is 1d8 plus 5 gold. Note, this only allows for a hiring roll. It does not guarantee that they will accept your offer. And then I also have the following generic rules. The cleaving rule. The carouse, experiment, tithe rules. A player may spend their money in an awesome or frivolous way, carousing, experimenting, or tithing. In doing so, 90% of the value of the GP burned this way is converted into a bank of experience points that their next character can use. Inheritance. A player may nominate a single heir, which will inherit their possessions upon the death of their character. The local authorities will assess a 20% tax before giving the inheritance to the heir. Dual wielding. Make 1 attack, but use 2 dice using the higher of 2 dice. Basically, advantage, but we didn't have a word for advantage back then. So, but basically, my house rule for dual wielding was that you get to roll 2d20 to keep high. Shields will be splintered. Source, the OSR. Anytime you take damage while holding a shield, you may opt to say that your shield absorbed the force of the blow. You take no damage, but your shield is destroyed. Tiny weapons do D4 damage. Small one-handed weapons do D6 damage. Weapons that are one-handed or two-handed, you do D6 if one-handed, D8 if two-handed. And if it is a large weapon, they do D10 damage, but you roll twice and take the higher. So basically, large weapons had damvantage in my house rules. Now, I don't know that those house rules were all particularly well thought out or balanced, but I did use them. Anyway, so this is my Derek's house rule little packet that I use when I play back in the day when I played BX D&D. Anyways, so that was sort of an insight. Now, this thing goes on for a while, at this point he does take a break because apparently I think all of those things, I'm reading here, all of those happen in a single session. That was one session of activities. Crazy, huh? One session, all that happened. Yeah, so the final party comp was okay, we're in for a good one. Oh man, we're in for a good one next. So up until this point, they have just been doing random dungeon generations, which again I think are kind of messed up. Not messed up, but they're just not really as good. They start B2, the Caves of Chaos, in their next adventure. So they actually start like a proper adventure. So the final Fellowship of the Bring currently, correct. I actually note that in the thing. It says this is really more of a change than a house rule because the inheritance tax is 10% and I changed it to 20%. So the final group was Bard, Gandalf, Frodo, Nilfin, Merry, Pippin, Boromir, and Legolas. Bard is a replacement for Aragorn, who died. Gandalf is an OG. Frodo is an OG. Nilfin is a replacement for either Sam or Gimli, who died. Merry is a OG, or no, Merry came in after Pippin was originally part of the original crew, but he left the party for a long time because he got hurt by rats. And then after he got better, they just continued to keep playing Merry because Merry had better hit points. But then after Gandalf and Sam died, Pippin came back into the party. And then there's Boromir and Legolas, who are also OGs. But Boromir has found a +2 sword, which he has named Usurper. So this is the current Fellowship of the Bling, all 8 of them. But yeah, so the next time they got together, Gimli died, not Gandalf. Gimli died. They go to the Caves of Chaos. But it is Monday night. It is 1:30 in the morning. We have $5 of tips and super chats, so I'm going to call that there. And we will start to wrap it up here. We still have a bunch of Stone Top that we are going to cover. We have about another 1,000 pages or so to go through between the 2 books, which we will do. It might take us a while, but we gonna do it. Now, hopefully the good news is that because now we are mostly moving into advice, I'm not literally going to read through all the advice. If you want the advice from Stone Top, you can buy the damn book. It's really going to be me more reacting to some of the generic ideas. There might be some stuff in there about creating fronts or creating adventures, more mechanical stuff. We'll definitely delve into that. Like we've looked at all the playbooks. We looked at the moves. Those are really mechanical. So I do think the Stone Top streams will go a little bit faster now that we're getting more into sort of just like the advice on how to play PBTA. Again, I'm not saying that we should skip that, but I've done whole streams dedicated to just advice from PBTA. And also I would say, buy the book and read it if you really want the adventure. As for me, I think I'm going to go and continue to read this awesome thread and just enjoy it and remind her. And especially, it's very funny because, of course, I have started. You may have noticed there was a post I posted a video this morning of our new session 0 of our new The One Ring campaign, which is not really an actual play. It's literally just a recording of me running stuff for a group of the patrons. But it's funny because it's funny because that's what made me think of this old thread was playing a Lord of the Rings game and being like, oh man, I remember the Fellowship of the Bling and how different that is, needless to say, than the One Ring. But yeah, I will leave you though with this before I depart. So they start the Caves of Chaos. The Fellowship of the Bling, of course, is Bard, Gandalf, Frodo, Nilfgaard. They go back to Elrond. The blinding light still burns in the eyes of the 4 Fellowship members when they return to Rivendell. Those cursed brownies had cast continual light in their faces. Gandalf asks Elrond for arcane assistance. Elrond, I could dispel this magical malady, but to divert my powerful 10th level magics for this task would require 1,000 gold pieces in expenses. Perhaps a less powerful elf can aid you. Elrond introduces the Fellowship to a friendly 5th level elf, who is delighted to cast Dispel Magic for the low price of 500 gold. We are now very low on gold, said Gandalf. I have heard rumors of a cave system known only as the Caves of Chaos. It is said that much treasure can be found there, and treasure is power, the power we need to confront Sauron. I have also heard of these Caves of Chaos, Boromir added, and the way I hear it, only death may be found there. Anyways, point is, the brownies, they didn't just cast light on them, they cast continual light. They were permanently and perpetually and forever blinded. And the only way to get it removed was to cast Dispel Magic. And having a caster cast spells for you was 100 GP per level. And since Elrond's level 10, it would cost 1,000 gold pieces to dispel it. So almost all of the gold that they acquired has got used up just to get the permanent blindness from the light spell being cast in 4 of their faces. Times are tough. When people are like, what did you use the money for? Well, there you go. There were no magic item markets. There was none of that stuff. So anyways, it's a great thread. Check it out. If you easy enough to find with Google and stuff like that. You have everything that you need there. Good morning, goblins and androids. I am, that is true. That's not well, but that's a tough choice, right? Platinus, you're like, dang, we've got a couple hundred experience points. Look how long it took us just to get those couple hundred experience points. Do we really want to start over at 0 again? Yeah. Unfortunately, that's not the way light works. Like if you cast it on somebody's face, it doesn't like emit light. It just makes them blind, basically. At least that's how I think the spell reads, but I could be wrong. Anyways, that is going to do it for me. Again, this might be a weird week with the scheduling, but we're going to do some more Stone Top and some more some other stuff. And of course, I'm going to be setting up some additional games. I don't know whether or not they are going to get recorded and sent out to YouTube or not. Depends on the people involved with them. But we do have an Avatar, Daggerheart, and Blades in the Dark game that are going to be getting kicked off here in the next couple of weeks. So, you know, maybe look forward to that. Again, not every actual play is for everybody, but you know, they can be kind of fun, especially since there's a lot of teaching that goes again. And these are not actual plays; they are actual plays. But if you enjoy that, you know, but just realize that you know, over the next couple of months, I'm going to be running, you know, my Friday night Fabulous Ultimate game, but also I'm going to be running 4 additional games of the One Ring, Avatar, Legends, Daggerheart, and Blades in the Dark. On top of that, I also have NightCon coming up in almost basically in 1 month. Origins is in 1, 2, 3. It's in 4 weeks and a day. And so I'm going to be getting some prep for that as well. So, you know, that's not to say that there won't be streams. Of course we will be. But, you know, I'm going to be pretty, you know, focused on running some games. And that's important for me as a content creator because, you know, it's very easy to get sucked into just looking at games and talking shit on games and whatever, and not actually playing games. And it's, you know, definitely something that I think more content creators, and I'm putting myself under this microscope as well, because it's easy to sort of get disconnected from the hobby that you are so associated with, right? And you're like, I looked at a million games, I'm running, you know, I'm generating a Kickstarter, I'm writing a game, I'm writing a game, I'm writing a game. It's like, okay, but are you running any games? Are you playing in any games? And sometimes the answer becomes no. So I expect this to take up a good chunk of my time, but I'm excited the fact that I'm going to basically be running 5 games more or less simultaneously, and also trying to launch my Moria solo play with, you know, kind of interacting with, I say solo play, but really it's more solo collab because we're going to be kind of playing it with the chat, tied in with the Moria mega game, solo mega game on the Discord. So if everything goes according to plan, I would be running 6 games, 1 solo game, 1 Fabulous Ultimate game, 1 the One Ring game, 1 Blades in the Dark, Daggerheart, and Avatar Legends, and potentially maybe someday an actual play in studio again with, you know, Bob and Smith and Tim and all our other favorites. We just got to get the scheduling on that lapped up. So, alrighty, folks. Well, thanks a lot for hanging out with this kind of, you know, weird late night stream. Hopefully you appreciated it. If you want to leave a comment, let me know. I'm curious what, you know, what you know, what do you think of that description of style of play? You know, is it totally anathema to you? And again, is that what a role-playing game means to you? Because again, for the better part of the first, you know, 10, 20 years of the hobby, that is what D&D meant. That's what a role-playing game in some ways was. You know, and now we have a very different definition of that. And that's okay. That can be fun too. It's not like they have to be either or. It can be both. But it's more of a question of, is that kind of experience, is that kind of more collaborative, we're all having fun sitting around the table, you know, rolling dice and getting into trouble, is that fun for you? Or, you know, is it all about, you know, just character arcs and story? So, you know, let me know. And of course, as always, we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Peace out, everybody. Good night.